Balochistan is in the throes of its fifth insurgency. There have been, these occasional outbursts in Balochistan right from the time when Pakistan occupied Balochistan in 1948. In the last 23-24 years, the movement has continued. It has, in fact, in many ways, actually gathered more steam. The man who's currently the chief minister has been accused of running death squads, has been involved in murders of people. They have tried murder and mayhem. These people have been tortured. Some of them have been killed. Their bodies have been thrown in the wilds. Some of those bodies have been mutilated. Balochistan, Pakistan's restive province, is in the news once again. But the news is not so much being covered by the Pakistani media, because the Pakistani media is quote-unquote independent and free to report. Apparently free to report only what the Pakistan army tells it to report. So Balochistan has been a bit of a black area as far as reportage is concerned. No reports can come out. The media is not free to travel or report from there, including the foreign media, including, in fact, the Pakistani media. A very tight control is kept. But it still is in the news thanks to social media and thanks to the efforts of the Baloch people to get their news out. There are some international news organizations which have covered it. Many of them which pretend to be very liberal and batting for human rights and liberal values have preferred not to report anything on Balochistan. But Balochistan is in the throes of its fifth insurgency. There have been, these occasional outbursts in Balochistan right from the time when Pakistan occupied Balochistan in 1948. Violating an agreement with the Khan of Kalat. Since that time, there have been these outbursts in Balochistan. Insurgencies have broken out, and this latest one started, by my estimate, around 2001. This is shortly after 9/11, when we suddenly saw the kind of attacks start mounting. The Quetta cantonment used to be shelled, or rockets used to be fired at it from the surrounding hills. And since then, it had started ramping up. But after the assassination by the Pakistan army of the venerable Nawab Akbar Khan Bugti, the insurgency went to a completely new level. There were instances where Pakistani forces could not enter into places, where people had stopped hoisting the Pakistani flag, where the Pakistani national anthem could not be sung anymore. So there have been that ebb and flow has been there, but in the last 23-24 years, the movement has continued. It has, in fact, in many ways, actually gathered more steam. Now, the Pakistan government has tried many things in the past, but none of those have succeeded, and their latest efforts also seem to be coming a cropper. Now, what they have tried is that traditional thing which they used to do. They would rig the elections to plant their own people in power. That doesn't seem to be working anymore. The man who's currently the chief minister has been accused of running death squads, has been involved in murders of people, and has actually enriched himself tremendously with the largesse of the Pakistani state. So he's basically lived off the blood of his own people. There are other quislings, like the man, although he's a Pashtun and not technically a Baloch, but belongs to Balochistan, Anwarul Kakar, who was the caretaker prime minister. So there are a number of these kind of characters which the Pakistan army has patronized over the years, but they have zero traction. I'm not even sure if their own families will vote for these characters. Of course, they win the elections, but then we know even Shahbaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif have won an election, which everybody knew they've lost. So forget about elections in Pakistan, don't matter. But the real representatives of the people have always been ignored or have been sidelined. So the Pakistan Army has tried this. They have tried to create this new class of people to actually, cut the Baloch movement. They've tried everything. So they've tried to give some jobs, including in the army and the security services. They have announced many schemes, none of which actually work on the ground. But they've announced all of that. That hasn't worked. They have tried murder and mayhem. If you look at the numbers of people who have been subjected to enforced disappearances, and again, one should hold many of these Western countries which keep talking about human rights all around the world, but you will never hear them talk about Balochistan, where the maximum number of enforced disappearances have taken place, including students, bona fide students studying in cities like Lahore, in Islamabad, in Multan, in Karachi, who have been picked up in the dark of the night and disappeared. And very often we have seen in the past as well as currently, these people have been tortured. Some of them have been killed. Their bodies have been thrown in the wilds. Some of those bodies have been mutilated. We've seen all of that. There have been instances where very senior political leaders from the Baloch national movement were once kidnapped from the office of their lawyer, the lawyer who is currently apparently in exile in one of the Nordic countries. They were kidnapped from the lawyer's office and they disappeared. There was a huge clamor, and then their bodies were found thrown on the roadside. So all of this has happened. And if the Pakistan Army thought that this would crush the Baloch quest for independence, for freedom, it hasn't happened. In fact, it has only fueled this movement. So currently, there are basically two streams which are operating. One is, of course, the militant stream, which is led by organizations like the Baloch Liberation Front, whose leader is this gentleman, Dr. Allah Nazar Baloch, who's a gold medalist, who's a doctor, but he has devoted his life to the liberation of Balochistan. There are other organizations like the BLA and some of these other organizations which have been very active over the last couple of years. And in fact, even more after what Imran Khan called the Taliban breaking the shackles of slavery. Now, the Pakistanis must have thought that, once the Taliban take over in Afghanistan, even the Balochistan problem will be sorted out, because very often the Baloch move into the Afghan territory and then come back from there. That is the Pakistani allegation, but nothing has happened to the Baloch from the Afghan end. In the recent years, we've seen a kind of a ferocity coming into the attacks. The audacity and the ferocity is something which has actually shaken up the Pakistan Army. A lot of the news and a lot of the attacks are actually kept under the radar screen. They are not publicized. But from what we hear from our own sources, there are large areas in which the Pakistan Army is now scared to go in because there are these ambushes which are taking place and casualties are taking place virtually on a daily basis. So there is this militant movement which is taking place. Side by side, there is a movement, a social political movement which is also taking place, which has actually galvanized the entire Baloch nation and in a way that we haven't seen anywhere in Pakistan in the past. Yes, there is the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is articulating Pashtun grievances further north in the Pashtun areas. But what we are seeing in Balochistan is something quite remarkable. It is very remarkable also because the Baloch, who have been traditionally a very conservative society, and at the same time a very tolerant society. They are not like the Pakistani Punjabis who wear their Islam on their sleeve and try and bully everybody with their Islam and try and pretend that Islam was actually discovered in Punjab rather than in Saudi Arabia. The Baloch are very comfortable with their Islamic identity. They are even more comfortable with the Baloch identity. And they don't feel the need that they need to, harass, bully, butcher religious minorities to prove a point. The Pakistanis, incidentally, have also tried to make better Muslims, quote unquote, better Muslims of the Baloch by throwing in organizations, terror organizations like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and others to proselytize among the Baloch. Even that hasn't really worked. So they've tried everything, and yet this very conservative orthodox society, which is also very liberal, tolerant in its own way, and also very secular in terms of how it interacts with religious minorities. But this is a society in which women, for example, traditionally used to stay at home. They were not so much there in the public. But what we have seen in this latest movement is that this political movement is now actually being spearheaded by women. Everybody has probably heard of this very feisty, very brave lady called Dr. Mahrang Balock, who is spearheading this movement. She's become the face of the movement. She's become an iconic figure in Balochistan, and she has been leading this agitation. But what she has done is even more remarkable, that unlike most people in the subcontinent or most leaders in the subcontinent who try and arrogate all the power to themselves and try and wipe out a second-rung leadership so that they are the whole and soul of every movement or every political party, she and her colleagues have actually set up a very solid second rung of leadership as well, and it is spread out. So that is one remarkable achievement she has done. But an even more remarkable achievement is that in this very traditional society, it is the women who are leading from the front, and the men folk are actually following them. This I can't imagine anywhere else in Pakistan happening, where even a walk in the park can lead to sexual harassment. In a society like that, it's these women who are leading. And the third very remarkable achievement she has done or achieved is that she has actually united the Baloch people under a kind of an umbrella organization. And this latest march which she held, which has raised a lot of eyebrows and caused a significant amount of fear in these brave machismo of the Pakistan army, which is now being challenged by women. In fact, incidentally, in the past, when the Taliban were attacking in what is the erstwhile FATA region, the tribal areas of Pakistan, the Pakistanis had come up with this tagline, "Darte hain banduko wale ek nihathi ladki se." It was built around Malala Yousafzai, but it became a kind of a clarion call to challenge the Taliban and to show that there's this young lady or young girl, and all these goons, Taliban goons, are actually afraid of her. And now that same slogan actually is hitting out at the Pakistan army, because what people are saying is that "Darte hain banduko wale," which is the Pakistan army, "ek nihathi ladki se," which is Dr. Mahrang Balock and her colleagues. And just to translate for those who do not understand Urdu or Hindi, it means the people with guns are terrified of this unarmed young woman, and that is very clearly visible, because if you see one of the latest press conferences of the Pakistani military spokesman, I don't want to get into his background and his educational or his linguistic skills, but here is this guy who started talking about how this whole Baloch national gathering or Baloch Raji Muchi movement, which was started recently, which saw a march in Gwadar. Which has now become a kind of an epicenter because of the kind of exploitation which has taken place in Gwadar, how the indigenous Baloch have been marginalized, how that entire port has been handed over to the Chinese, who are like the new colonial masters. It harks back to the times when the Europeans were allowed these so-called factories in various port cities, and which was then used to colonize India. It harks back to that. It has there are parallels that can be drawn. And then, of course, the Punjabis who have come and tried to grab all the land and tried to capture all the economy of the region. So there has been this building, there has been this resistance which has been building out there, including by people who have been traditionally aligned with the Pakistan state. The Jamaat-e-Islami, one of their leaders in Gwadar, has been spearheading a movement out there, which has been very effective, has mobilized people. But what Dr. Mahrang Balock and her colleagues have done is that they called for this Baloch national gathering, and they actually managed to strike a resonance with virtually everybody in Balochistan. And we saw that despite all the roadblocks, despite all the obstacles placed in the path of the people, we saw footages of army men showing their machismo by beating up women. Despite all of that, a huge gathering did collect in Gwadar. Now, not only did it happen in Gwadar, but in many other towns of Balochistan, there were demonstrations taking place by people who were identifying with the Baloch national gathering, but were not able to travel, so they were doing it in their own area. So what she has done, and that is yet another remarkable achievement, she has united the Baloch nation, which has been traditionally somewhat fractious. She has united them under a single umbrella, which again is something that the Punjabis sitting in Lahore and Islamabad have found shocking. They never expected this to happen because the traditional or the conventional wisdom in Punjab was that the Baloch can be easily bought over, the Baloch can be easily divided. You can play upon their egos and their fault lines and their tribal structures to pit one against the other, so you divide and rule. And what she has done is, not only has she gathered everybody under a single umbrella, but even more importantly, many of those traditional fault lines of tribes and tribal rivalries and others have now, in a sense, been papered over. So many of the people who are associating with this movement have forgotten their tribal affiliations, have forgotten or have at least pushed them to the background to come for a national cause. Now, this was an effort which many people before Dr. Mahrang Balock had tried. There was a very robust debate in the 2000 in the late 2000s after Akbar Bukti's death, murder rather, and even subsequently. And there was this debate on the need for a single national party. And what that meant was that, traditionally political movements for liberation or for independence have been led by a single political party which has spearheaded it, and that always eluded the Baloch. That unity always eluded the Baloch. So Dr. Mahrang Balock and her colleagues have managed to in a sense, get around that obstacle. That's remarkable. And yet another remarkable achievement is that all those traditional leaders, whether it's the tribal lords, whether it's the big landed guys, whether it's those businessmen, whether it's traditional political leaders, they've all become marginalized. Nobody listens to them anymore. So all these squeezlings that the Pakistan army has propped up, the Sarfaraz Buktis and the Anwarul Kakars and the Jan Achakzais and others, their propagandists and their drum beaters, they won't get a dog catcher's vote in Balochistan. and even the other traditional leaders, big tribal chiefs, do not find the same kind of traction that Dr. Mahrang Balock and her associates get. So I think this is a development that we need to look out for. Because we are in India, the easiest thing for Pakistanis to do would be, oh well, the Indians are talking about it, so this movement must be having an Indian support. I wish it had some Indian support, but frankly speaking, I don't think India should get involved in it at all, simply because that will there's very little India can do anyways. But even if India was to get involved, the Prime Minister of India had made some remarks talking about how much the Baloch are in love with India, etc. And all that it did, you were not giving any material assistance, you were not giving any monetary assistance, and all that did was that it gave a reason for the Pakistanis to give a bad name to this movement and then crack down on it much harder. So I think that is something we should avoid. We should observe it, we should watch it, we should, to the extent it is possible for individuals to talk about it publicly, to try and shake the dead conscience of these conscience keepers of the world in the West, to try and ask them as to why they are so silent, why they are like Mahatma Gandhi's three monkeys, that they don't see any evil taking place in Balochistan, they don't speak about the evil taking in Balochistan, they don't hear anything about what is happening in Balochistan. What is it that is preventing them from doing this? And I think it is important that we raise these issues because if this region is a part of India's neighborhood and is critical for India's security, then at the very least we should keep a very strong eye on developments taking place in the region. And frankly speaking, what is happening in Balochistan is quite remarkable and something that we need to watch out for, because this will continue to grow as Pakistan's problems increase. This is one of the big problems that Pakistan is going to confront as it moves forward, because a lot of other movements are going to dovetail on this particular movement. We are already seeing a major movement taking place in the Pashtun areas. We are seeing the stirrings of some movements in places like POJK and POGB. We are seeing a lot of restiveness in those regions. We are seeing some green shoots of similar movements in Sindh, and we are seeing that in the Pakistan army, which used to run rampant in Pakistan, is suddenly having to look within its own ranks to see whether it is not a divided house itself. So I think there are serious implications to what has started to happen in Balochistan, and we will ignore it at our own peril.